Good evening, and thanks for coming. Before I start on the events of November the 22nd, 1963, I probably should give you a brief background on how I was in Dallas to cover this thing. I was born in Ireland in 1934, and my father named me after Eamon Kennedy, who was the first president of Ireland. My father's name, strangely enough, was John Fitzgerald Kennedy, and never really knew his middle name until he died in the 90s, but found out then. Anyway, growing up in Ireland, the family moved to London right after the outbreak of World War II, and as a child, I experienced the Blitz and the constant bombing. We were evacuated to Scotland for a couple of years, and it was a little bit better there, but we were in Glasgow, and they used to bomb the Clyde, where they made ships. So before the end of the war, the family moved back to London, and it was about that time, I was 12 or 13, I became interested in photography, and I'd probably checked out every book in the local libraries and read them. So I decided to give it a try. I was doing a newspaper round for about a year, and I saved enough money to buy a camera and some darkroom equipment. And right about that time, I had to do my national service in the Royal Air Force, and they asked me what I was interested in, and I said I'd like to do photography, and they gave me some aptitude tests and said I had no aptitude for that business. Shows you what they know. So I became a jet mechanic instead, and but I continued doing photography during my Air Force service and joined a local camera club in Norwood where I lived, and there were a lot of very astute photographers in that club, including several fellows of the Royal Photographic Society. But the first year in the contest, I took first and second prize, which astounded everyone, including me. So it went on from there. After the Air Force, I worked as various assistants, and I did a season with the Pacific and Orient Line as a ship's photographer. And then I decided to move to Canada. And that's where my photography career really took off. I worked in Ottawa for the Ottawa Citizen for a while. Then I teamed up with another photographer. We had a thing called Capital Press. We covered Canadian affairs for magazines, including Time and Life, and the Montreal Star, and the Toronto Globe and Mail, and Maclean's, and a whole bunch of Canadian stuff. And I did that for 4 years, and I met and photographed some very interesting people, including David Ben-Gurion, who's the father of Israel, Charles de Gaulle, some British royalty, can't remember their names right now, and also John F. Kennedy. His first visit overseas was to Canada. I covered that event. So Canada was wonderful, except I wasn't crazy about the weather. And I was driving to work one day in late August, and it started to snow. And I said, I got to get out of here. So I applied to the US for a permanent residency, and moved to the US in December of 19, when was that? Got the date written down here somewhere, but it was in 1961. And I didn't come directly to the US. I took 3 months, and I worked for a newspaper in Kingston, Jamaica, the Daily Gleaner. And then when I came back, I applied at the Miami Herald, and they said, if you'd only been here a couple of weeks early, we just hired. We had no vacancies, so. I was wondering what to do next, and I bought a bus ticket because I'd seen pictures of San Francisco, and they looked wonderful. And I bought a bus ticket to San Francisco from Miami. And about halfway through the trip, I had no idea how far it was. I asked the driver, I had to get off that bus for a day. I said, if I get off, is the ticket still good? And he said, yeah, there's no problem. So I said, I'm going to check off for a couple of days and get back on. Well, I never got back on the bus. And I don't know what happened to the ticket. But I went into the Dallas Morning News, and Tom Dillard, who was the chief photographer, said they didn't have any openings, but he drove me personally over to the Dallas Times Herald. And that's how I ended up there. They really didn't have an opening either. But I hung around for 2 or 3 days, and I made the front page every day. So John Mazziotto, who was the chief photographer, his wife quit so I could have the job. That's how I came to Dallas. It was kind of bizarre. So, you know, we were a pretty small, close-knit group. There were 7 photographers, and we covered everything from sports, cowboys, baseball, fashion, politics, anything you can imagine. And the assassination day was you know, covering a president is never just another day. It's always something really special. And when I got up that morning, it was raining, so I had to find a way to protect my cameras from the rain. So I had it was like an almost white-colored raincoat on, and set out for Love Field. And we'll see if we can get these pictures going here. Just as Air Force One taxied in, the sun broke out. That's me in 1963. You'd never guess it, but I was pretty young. This was the last close-up of President Kennedy. I got that. I was backed up against the limo. I got in front of him, and I asked him to hold it, and he held it for about 2 seconds, and I got one frame. So, and then he got in the limo, and that was it. This is at Love Field, some of the pictures of him greeting the crowd. You can see the crowd's very enthusiastic. And now, most of these pictures were shot holding the camera above my head. So you really can't tell what you're getting, and you have to pre-focus. And it's before automatic anything. You have to set the aperture and the shutter speed so as you get a sharp picture that was in focus. It was a little bit of a trick. But he worked that line of people, and one of the things about shooting back then with film is that these events only last about 4 or 5 minutes, and there's no time to change film. So you have 36 exposures at 2 cameras. So you tended to ration yourself on how much you shot on everything, because if you ran out of film, by the time you reloaded, the event would be over. It was too slow. I moved around to the other side there. You can tell I was really close. These are all shot with a really wide-angle lens, so I was just inches away. This picture ran on the front page of the Dallas Times Herald. This is at Parkland. My assignment was with the reporter I was with, Bob Fenley, was to stay at Love Field and wait for him to return and shoot the exit across. So we decided to have some lunch at some new Polynesian restaurant at Love Field, and the waitress told us that she heard that Kennedy was shot, so we checked it out, and sure enough, it was true. And we drove very, very fast to Parkland. I was in my new Studebaker Hawk, which was state of the art at the time. That's a picture of me there in my raincoat, and next to me is Bob Jackson, and the other photographer is the chief photographer of the Herald, John Mazziota. We were all covering. I was there before them. We had not heard, we know the president had been shot. At that time, we didn't have any idea what his condition was. Then we found out, and that's when I got these grief pictures, these two sisters crying. That's Senator Ralph Yarborough, who just got the news. He was traveling with the Kennedy party. And this picture, which ran, I think, in every newspaper in the world, maybe. But I never got the name. I only shot one frame on this. And we found out later that it was a girl called Kathy Atkinson. And she actually made a career out of this one photo. She wrote a book and ended up as on the guest lecture circuit. So she died about 3 years ago. And I have a copy of her book. But the thing that makes this picture interesting is the light was right, which always helps, and she was facing the right way. You know, you tend to read things left to right. If she'd been looking the other way, I don't think it would have worked. But when you read from left to right, you stop on the face. And that's the way it appeared in the newspaper. I think even the Russians ran this in Vestia and some of the other newspapers. And there's the shot of the crowd, Love Field. Now that's Kathy Atkinson. About 4 or 5 days later, you can see her appearance has changed dramatically. They've got her hair all done, and she looks quite different. I look the same. What can I say? You can tell this was a long time ago because you could buy new tires for $8. And a new car cost $1,800. This is Jackie Kennedy. You can see her on the right there, getting into the car, coming out of Parkland. These are the first pictures of Lyndon Johnson, who came out a side door and at Parkland Hospital. I just happened to be right there when he came out. That's the Tippett family. If you recall, he was a police officer that was shot by Lee Harvey Oswald before he was captured. This was shot sometime after. This was when the Warren Commission visited Dallas. It was a Saturday, as I recall, and it was chilly out. I got up at first light. I was there. No one said they were going to the Texas School Book Depository, but I figured they had to go there. So I was there all day, and I had 2 cameras focused on that window, and a bunch of other photographers and news media showed up, and they all left. It was about to get dark, and I was about to leave, and I saw the movement of the window, and I got that shot, which ran a full page in Life magazine and a few other places around the world. This is the famous picture that Bob Jackson did. Now this was shot at the police station. We had both photographed Lee Harvey Oswald the night before. They paraded him around and there was kind of a press conference. And I had talked Bob into swapping with me because I was supposed to be at the police station and Bob was supposed to be down at the courthouse. So we swapped, and I was waiting down the courthouse, and Bob got the Pulitzer Prize. So don't believe in the luck of the Irish. It doesn't always work. So this is the reaction of the crowd down at the jail when the news came out that Lee Harvey Oswald had been shot. The crowd were whooping it up and rejoicing. And this is at Parkland. That's under that shade is Lee Harvey Oswald. Now this is Marina Oswald, who's Lee Harvey's wife. And I happened to do a magazine piece on an artist a few weeks before the assassination, and he had a reception that was given by a Russian woman. Her name was Cartier Ford, and I'd really forgotten all about it. And about 2 or 3 weeks after the assassination, no one knew where Marina Oswald was. And so this lady called me and said, and we talked about René Francois, who was the artist, and I said, she said, well, I've got Marina staying with me. And I said, Marina who? She said, well, Marina Oswald. Would you like to come out and take some pictures? I said, I'll be right there. So I spent a whole day with her, and I got a lot of pictures of her bathing the baby and doing the housework, all kinds of stuff. And then the next day, she christened the new baby at a Russian Orthodox church, and that ran. That's Marina. You can see she's quite happy, and the kid looks happy. And this was the next day, the christening. Now this was probably the shot of Jack Ruby. They were taking him out for psychiatric evaluation, and it happened around noontime, so everyone was having lunch and no one was covering it except me, I think. But he was up on a loading dock in a dark area, and I got this shot with a flash, which. So when I submitted it to the Times Herald, the city desk said we just got instructions from the managing editor. He doesn't want to see any more Jack Ruby pictures. And I said, well, this is it's different from all the others. They said, well, we can't use it. Anyway, Life used it 2 pages, and then so did every other magazine in the world. It went in quick, to Stern, everywhere. But and the title was, they put on it, Is This Man Sane? There may be a shot of that. There it is. Was this man sane? I covered the whole Jack Ruby trial. I was there every day. And this is one of the little press conferences things they had. They used to march him down. These were all these guys are deputy sheriffs guarding him, and he's on the right there. That was Jack Ruby's attorney, Melvin Belli, having lunch. People lining up to get in the trial. This was a picture I got of Melvin Belli when the jury found Jack Ruby guilty, and Mr. Belli made some very derogatory remarks about Texas justice at the time, as I remember. But there he is. Now this shot was before the assassination. It was Lyndon Johnson's Air Force plane ran off the taxi strip and got stuck in the mud. So I was out there covering that with a reporter, and I was taking pictures of him, and he was obviously not liking it, because he shouted at me several times, and then he told me to quit. And then, apparently, he didn't like being photographed with his glasses on, because he'd never appeared with glasses before. Anyway, he strode over to me, and he said, "Didn't I tell you not to take pictures?" I said, "I think you did." And then he said, "What's your name?" And I said, "Kennedy." And the reporter said, and then he got really frustrated. And the reporter said, "No, his name really is Kennedy, Mr. Vice President." So that was that story. This was an event the 6th floor put on, and we have the 4 surviving photographers from the Dallas Times Herald that cover the event. And the moderator, I can't remember his name, is on the left, but the next guy with the glasses is Willie Allen, that's me, Bob Jackson, and a guy by the name of Daryl Heikus. Is there more? I think that's it. So, to wrap up, after the next year, I was contacted by the Miami Herald, and I went to work for them for about 3.5 years during the 60s, which was very interesting. And then I came back to work for the Times Herald. I took a job in Western Canada for about 3 months in Vancouver, but it was so boring. And I was talking to someone, a friend at the Herald, and they sensed I wasn't happy there, so they called me and asked me if I'd like my old job back. So I did miss the newspaper business, and I took it. And I spent about 1.5 years working with the Dallas Times Herald, and I broke away and became a freelance photographer, self-employed, in 1969. And I've been kind of unemployed and employed since. So lived in San Francisco for 20-odd years, North Carolina for 8 years. And 3.5 years ago, we moved back to Dallas, because I have 2 sons here and 3 grandkids. And the funny thing about the Kennedy thing, I kind of relegated it to the back of my mind for many years. But I saved all the material and all the prints and all the negatives I had. And when I came back, the Dallas Morning News did a front page piece on me. I never expected to be on the competitor's front page, my wildest dreams. And it it's kind of brought it all up fresh again. And all my material I donated to the 6th floor museum. There were over 2,000 negatives and about 400 prints. So they're making good use of it, I think. So it was an interesting time, and it was hard to cover this type of event without becoming emotional. But you get too emotional, you can't get anything done. So that's how it went. And I think that probably wraps it up. I'll take some questions.
Questions, comments, protest.
Mr. Kennedy, one quick question. What camera did you use, and did you have a motor drive on it?
No motor drive. I used a Canon, a rangefinder camera, and a Nikon F, which was a single lens reflex.
He had 36 images, and so he had to be very sparing. Unlike today where we have 10 images and you can choose one, he got one chance. And he scored 3 times. Ruby, Oswald's, and the young lady, and finally the portrait of President Kennedy.
I have a comment, brief comment, and then a question. The comment has to do with the fact that when you tried to photograph Johnson, he got very irritated. And in my opinion, that's probably because he was well aware of what was about to take place later that day.
No, I don't think so. That wasn't the same day. That was months before the assassination.
It was what?
Months before the assassination.
Oh, was it? Oh,
Yeah.
okay. The question has to do with Kathy Atkinson. I noticed in this picture, it looks like she has freckles. Can't tell what color her hair is. Was her hair red?
No, it was brown.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Awesome.
But they did a total change of appearance on her when she showed up to have her picture taken in the newspaper.
A lot different, isn't it?
Yeah, not recognizable.
Mr. Kennedy, as a photographer that was working for the news, did you own the pictures from your camera, or did the newspaper?
Well, that's a great question. No one really knew who owned anything. You know, I kept, our filing system wasn't that very good at the Times Herald. They would lose stuff, and you never find it again. So I tended to keep anything I thought was important in my own file. So I had all the negatives from the Jack Ruby trial. There were over 2,000 of them.
Mr. Kennedy, what did Kathy Atkinson's, what was her book about, and how could she make a whole career out of it?
Well, I've read the book, and I have a copy that she sent me. It was about her change in life. It changed her life, being on the front page, and actually she became quite famous. She was in a whole bunch of different organizations, and a couple of years after the assassination, I was invited to appear at as a guest of honor at some dinner that they put on for her. But the book's still available. You can find it. It's called Grief of a Nation. And but the book is a very personal book about her life and how it changed and how her family's life changed because of this one photo. Did you have a question?
Mr. Kennedy, When I first saw that picture in the display case in our gallery here in the library, I thought she was a Kennedy. I thought she looked so much like one of the Kennedy children. Not Jackie and John's, but maybe one of the family.
Yeah, there is some resemblance there.
So having been a photographer and seen, history firsthand, what is your feelings about how photography has evolved in catching history now? Like, because it's, seeing the classic medium that you see in everything that you captured and how it's evolved today, how do you feel that photography and the role of capturing history has evolved since?
Well, capturing something is more of a mental thing, and it's an outlook and a skill of being able to see something that everyone else has missed, maybe, and also timing, just being at the right time, in the right place. The actual recording of the images is much easier now than it was back then. Cameras are totally automatic. There was nothing automatic about these cameras. You had to hand focus them, set the aperture, and set the shutter speed. It was a nightmare if the sun was going in and out because you had to constantly change all those things. And shooting over your head, you can't hold the camera as steady as if you've got it jammed up against your forehead. So you have to use faster shutter speed and a wider aperture, which makes the depth of field a little narrower. So the focusing has to be very accurate. You can't focus because you can't see through the camera, so you're guessing at what the focus is. But with cameras now, where you can take thousands of pictures on one chip, the nightmare on covering these type of events was to run out of film and have to change film, because these things don't last very long. When you change in film, someone else is getting all the pictures. So you had to judiciously shoot so as you always had film. That doesn't apply anymore. With digital, you can go on shooting 1,000 images. But the art of seeing something, that hasn't changed.
In your involvement with the pre-assassination, post-assassination, the pictures and all, and put you on the spot here a little bit, and you can certainly decline to answer the question, but do you have any sense, do you have a personal position on the whole conspiracy question?
Well, I've never really been able to support the conspiracy theory. And I'm not saying there was no conspiracy, but I tend to go with what the Warren Commission came up with, that there was one assassin, and it was Lee Harvey Oswald. And now, if they come up with something irrefutable, I'd certainly accept it, but I think it went down the way the Warren Commission said it went down.
Any other? Okay.
Exactly what year did you find out that you were Mr. Kennedy's fifth cousin?
Well, I'm not sure that story. That was a story that I had a very wealthy aunt who lived in South Africa that went back to Ireland and spent 6 months doing the family tree. And she maintained that we were related to the Fitzgerald side of the family. That would be Rose Kennedy. And that we were fourth cousins. But I never did follow up on that or or tried to figure out if she was right or she imagined the whole thing.
Thanks.
Any other questions? Okay.
Since you were so limited with the number of shots that you could take because of the limitation of, you know, the number of shots that are on the film, was there any particular shot that you wish that you could have gotten that you were not able to get?
Well, the only one I wish I hadn't, I'd got was I wish I hadn't swapped out the assignment with Bob Jackson, because then I would have been in the right place at the right time. But those things happen. But otherwise, I can't think of anything.
Any other questions?
Do you enjoy photography today as much as you did back then?
Yes, I do. I'm not doing photojournalism anymore, but I enjoy doing fine art photography, and I've been doing that for about 20 years now. And mostly landscapes and seascapes, some architectural subjects. And I have it on a website. It's eamonkennedy.com. And it's split into two segments. One is fine art prints on original fiber paper made in the darkroom, and mostly black and white. And then the other segment is the digital end, which is much bigger now than.
Do you think creative-wise, and I mean, back then what you had to do to capture these photos was so incredible, and now it's a lot easier. So do you miss that, I guess, that challenge that?
Well, that's a technical challenge. The art of seeing the picture is just as demanding as it was when we used film. It's just, with digitally, it's just easier to record the images.
There was a certain design to your pictures. Can you tell us a little bit about your training to get that design? There's, for lack of better words, a certain architecture.
Well, when I was doing photography, growing up, I'm also a painter. So in fact, I used to, back in the early 60s, I used to paint every weekend outdoors. And I think the sense of design probably came from drawing and painting. And it carries over to photography.
You mentioned that a lot of your negatives were missing from the Dallas Times Herald files.
Yeah, some went missing. Right after the assassination, the next day, Dallas filled up with foreign journalists, literally thousands of them, and we had a very lax security system. Anyone could walk into the paper, into the photo department, so anything that was left laying around went missing.
Did any of your pictures ever show up elsewhere?
No.
I thought you'd mentioned some of them were in an Italian magazine.
Yeah, there was a fellow named Naren Gunn who had all the negatives from Marina Oswald shoot, and I never got them back. But what are you going to do? I've noticed some of the pictures show up at auctions every now and again, and
I remember it seemed like in one of the programs last year or the year before, about all the events surrounding the Kennedy assassination, there was It seemed like there were FBI agents that wanted to gather all the pictures, evidence, documents, anything like that. And I think we had a speaker who resisted that or something. Were you pressured by the FBI to give up your pictures? And
They called me twice a year until about the mid-90s. But I would hear from them twice a year. They wanted all my material. And of course I never gave them anything, but I held on to it.
Why do you suppose that so many years after the assassination they wanted your photos?
I have no idea.
A gentleman in the audience wanted to know how old the girl was when the picture was captured.
She was 14.
When you took this absolutely beautiful photo of this young lady, how in the world did you ever find out who she was, and how much trouble was it for you to find out who she was? Because I'm sure things were so hectic at that time and everything was moving very fast.
Well, that's really a great question, because one of the rules of thumb being a newspaper photographer is you always get the names of the people who are in the picture, but I didn't get her name because I was too busy doing, it was happening too fast. And I only shot one frame. And didn't think much about it at the time until I printed it and I realized it was kind of an interesting shot. But she showed up, I think it was the next day or 2 days, at the Dallas Times Herald with her mother to buy some back copies of the newspaper. So, and chance would have it that the women's editor, whose name was Vivian Castlebury, noticed her buying the newspapers and talked to her and found out who she was. So she did the interview, and that's why they took the picture of me and her together.
Incidentally, we are going to have Vivian Castleberry, who's 94 years old. We will be having her next spring. She goes to be with her daughter during the winter months, and she'll be back in the spring. She used to cover the fashion and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And then they were literally out of reporters for the weekend, so they said, well, okay, we'll let a woman cover this. And she did an outstanding job covering the assassination that weekend. And it was one of the first times a woman was ever allowed to cover something besides fashion and children's things and that sort of thing. You had mentioned that on this photo that you had submitted to your editor a stack of photos that you had.
Yeah.
And really, this was not your top one that you thought they would choose. You mentioned that this was kind of an aftermath, and they said, this is it.
It's always a mystery when you work to a newspaper, when you submitted a bunch of photos, which one they'd pick. Usually wasn't the best one, but I think this time they did a good job because it turned out to be a winner.
It certainly was. Any last minute questions? I cannot thank our speaker enough for bringing to America in 1963 and today a front row ability to see history. If he hadn't captured some of these images, when we were talking yesterday, it wasn't just the photos he captured. He captured their emotions, the grief when they announced the president was dead, the grief of the girl when she heard that the president had died. This was taken at Parkland Hospital. The grief of the nation, but on the other hand, he captured the excitement at Love Field, the exuberance of the parade. And so, I mean, well, not the parade, but all the excitement at Love Field. And I just thought he had a fascinating ability to capture people's hearts. Eamon Kennedy, thank you so much for preserving history.
Thank you.